If everything goes according to plan, then tomorrow is a very big day for Smite with the mid-season patch, patch 5.13 being released. This patch really shuffles around a lot of cards that we've been dealt half a year ago from the Season 5 overhaul of the Conquest map, and also touches upon various things outside of that. We will see matchmaking changes, new items, and major god changes or reworks, so there's a lot to look forward to. And in this video, I want to give you a bit of a summary of an overview based on the experience that I've gathered on PTS especially, as to how the changes actually feel, how impactful they are, and which ones you should look out for when the patch goes live. It's one thing to read information on paper and another thing to see them in action, which is why I felt like sharing my experience here could help you out a little bit. While I didn't get to see every change firsthand, I tried many of them and others I saw on enemies or allies, so I could get a bit of a picture on that as well. The talking points of this video will be stability or the first days after the patch, then items, then gods, and then other changes. Let's begin with the first days of the patch. As they say, never play on patch day. With this patch, there will be a large amount of changes to Smite in various different ways. That means things are bound to break. In the last PTS build, most things were actually stable. There were still some issues, but they were relatively minor for the most part, with one bigger exception. And the ones that are left are being worked on. That doesn't mean that I expect a perfect patch day. Putting a PTS build on the live client often results in scaling issues, which lead to problems that weren't expected beforehand and will have to be fixed within the next days. So if the first day isn't perfect, don't be upset right away. It might just be something that gets ironed out in the first week. So yes, you can pretty much as always expect some problems with a patch, and if that's not the case, that would be more of a lucky thing. With that out of the way, let's move on to the actual changes. In the context of these changes, I will say that I am not going to go through every single change. This is not a patch notes review, but only the changes that I think are important and relevant enough to talk about them. For example, Serket and Zhonghui have been nerfed, but it doesn't really impact their characters drastically in how they are played or their impact on the game, to a point that I think they're worth pointing out specifically, and maybe some of those changes will go under the radar or will have a bigger impact than I expected beforehand, but I hope that for the majority I can kind of pinpoint the ones that really make a difference. And that brings us to the items, more specifically the masks. The first mask here is Lonos Mask. Lonos Mask is a defense mask that ups your defense and decreases your damage. You can see the stats on the side here. I think this one is relatively promising. It actually gives you huge mitigation values to the point that you will have more damage mitigated than taken at the end of the match, even when going for a bruiser build on certain characters, and it's also cheaper than the other masks. So this one can really help less tanky characters transition into a more tanky role, especially in late game when their damage isn't as impactful anymore. For example, if they purely rely on their base damage, then this can be a very strong shift for them. It's not good for everyone, but I think it has its use. A similar thing applies for Bamba's Mask. I think you have a bit of a worse trade-off here with losing damage and taking more damage, but the high amount of cooldown reduction and the tons of movement speed that you get can be good for some characters at least. The primary options here are characters that either don't really care that much about their damage and are there for CC mostly, but usually not the support, or characters that have so much damage that they don't mind losing a little bit and they benefit a lot from the other stats. Rangness Mask, the third one, is in my opinion the weakest one right now. You can only build it on tanks, so it's not like damage build benefit from it anymore. You take 25% more damage and you only get 15% extra damage or 20% extra damage in return at best. So really, this one doesn't really take the spotlight. It also is a bit more expensive than Lonos Mask at least, and the other stats are okay, but I think almost always you will find something else that is better. The most legitimate reason to build this, in my opinion, is if you're going for one-shot builds. So Reaver and Ethereal Staff are two items that I think can have a decent impact, but we will have to see how their final versions are after the release, if there are some things that still work the same way regarding interactions or not. So the verdict on these ones is still out, and I still want to crunch some more numbers before I say something here, but I will say that the changes may be impactful at least, especially for gods with low cooldown reduction abilities, so Reaver might have an impact. Book of Thoth is still good, it's maybe even better for some characters with the scaling, but you want to build it earlier now. In previous times you could build Book of Thoth whenever you wanted to, now you want to start stacking as early as possible, so this is something you want to build around the time that you finish your boots. Only Hunter's Garb is an item that will probably still go under most people's radar, but it actually offers a ton of mitigation for a relatively cheap price and should not be underrated, especially for tanks, even though the rest of the stats aren't the best ones in terms of team benefit otherwise. At least for solos, this item is pretty insane. Silver Branch Bow, Verdict still out, but I think it is maybe a bit relevant now because the stats are getting better and more useful. The problem with it is that it's still something that's hard to fit into anyone's build at all because for most situations there are typically better items. Toxic Blade now has 30% attack speed as well, so this may very well be more relevant. Previously it was just not worth picking up over other attack speed items because they just offer so much more damage, but now the stats are actually pretty good and you still have the benefit of anti-heal. Warrior's Blessing has been nerfed quite a bit with the healing and the health being decreased, and as such I would say it is probably no longer a must buy in solo lane for all gods. I think some gods can get away with other builds and still be reasonably successful. Now on to the god changes. Aposh is getting significant buffs to his ultimate and to his lane pressure through the one having 2 corpses at all times, the ultimate also going through walls and having stacking anti-heal. As such, he has more of a niche in Conquest now. I don't think he's gonna be Sutton top tier, I think he's gonna be stronger and he's gonna be more competition in specific counter matchups, especially against healing characters. A team heavily focusing Aposh can still slap him though. Artemis change is a bit conditional, she no longer has crit, but now she has a more consistent damage increase through CC. The problem is that there are some interactions with that may be changed in the very near future in regards to how the damage amplification works in combination with other damage amplifications like Runeforged Hammer or like crit items. Due to that, it's hard given an absolute verdict here as well, and I will reserve that until I also have crunched some more numbers on live client with the changed stats. Bakasura is much more potent. Through his ult he can now get his passive, he can now get his extra defenses, and he can now also get free healing in the middle of the ult basically. That means he has a lot more to go against you when ulting you. It's weird that his ult is kind of the part that got buffed, but at the same time it doesn't make him as minion dependent, and that is scary for a lot of other players. And it also means that anti-heal will probably be a very good choice against him to counter exactly that healing during the ultimate. Freya is very strong. She will shred you with either kind of build at the moment, and I don't think the minor nerfs that she's getting on life will change that. A quick important note here, if you're playing against a Freya, don't stand too close to the minions, otherwise you get hit by multiple detonates. As a rework, she will probably be banned in ranked automatically, if not, definitely ban her at the moment, because I'm pretty sure she needs quite heavy nerfs. Hunbats has been buffed in multiple ways, but will, like Artemis, kind of get nerfed. The multipliers to his passive, his new passive, and Hydras and Deathbringer will all get changed, so that will make him a little bit weaker than he is on PTS right now, but he will still be better overall, and that means he will be picked a little bit more. In his case, especially for competitive, that might make him a more dominant force than before. Ne Zha is scary. The movement speed plus power buff is actually insane for early pressure, meaning you get more damage out of your ultimate as well, you get more rotation speed as a jungler especially, and all these kinds of things. Ne Zha is someone to watch out for a lot, and he's another one of those where I think he might get some nerfs later down the road. Much like for Hunbats, for him this consistency buff was more of a direct buff, with the difference that his one is not gonna get nerfed later down the road through a change that just wasn't in PTS, but rather needs some actual nerfs. Raven had interesting changes overall, but I wouldn't necessarily say they were straight up buffs, rather some changes and adjustments that in some regards also make him weaker. What we can expect are some different builds that we didn't see before that may make the character work in other ways, so make sure to counter build and look at what he's building. Samdi is more balanced than before, but still towards the stronger side overall, and will probably still be a threat, especially with his ultimate. That's it for the god changes, but there are some game changes as well. Matchmaking is now done through a countdown timer, so the queue pop will be after a while. On PTS, the matches felt more balanced most of the time, so I think this should translate over well to live client with PTS having a smaller population, but I don't want to speak too soon here as things can always go wrong in that regard, and PTS doesn't necessarily reflect the real life environment. In Conquest specifically, late game will be shorter, 3k pots last through death, so when we get to the point that people get those pots, there's gonna be a lot of slaughter going on and things are going very quickly, especially with the more tower pressure added to them as well. The changes to the Harpies are also interesting and haven't been taken too much notice of. The big Harpies will now give you 60 gold and 48 XP and have 410 plus 55 HP per level, whereas the Oracles give you 66 gold and 80 XP, so almost double the XP, and have 500 HP plus 110 HP. That means sooner or later we might go into a meta where people don't go for mid Harpies first, but try to contest the Oracles after the first buff camps as soon as possible. Supports will now get bonus XP, or rather the lowest level player will get bonus XP, which is in most cases support, but only while sharing XP with other players, and that will have an impact in Conquest. It was noticeable on PTS, but not crazily noticeable. Buff camps have also been changed. It's not super noticeable, but at least the people using red buff will notice this a little bit with their clear, and the value of purple buff, especially having 2 of them, has increased a fair bit and will be quite scary once people figure that out properly. Outside of that, we also have ban reminders and a commendation system for some extra points for being nice, so that are some nice gimmicks too. That's it for the overview. I hope this gave you a bit of an insight and was interesting and insightful enough. With that, thank you guys very much for watching. If you're new to the channel, feel free to sub button with the bell, it really helps me out. Other than that, see you for the next one tomorrow. Duke Sloth, out.